Welcome back. And in today's session of Around the WaterCooler, senior leaders are going to be reflecting on the challenges that they and others are facing around skill shortages. And we're going to explore the action businesses, educators, and indeed society need to be taking to secure skills that are critical to closing that very gap. And I've got three great guests to help me today, and I'd love to introduce you to them. So to begin with, Rich, could you tell everyone watching a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, good morning. My name is Rich Jones. I've been doing this IT gig for about 35 years, 20 years in the private sector in financial services, and 15 years in the public sector in central and local government. And currently, I'm an independent consultant helping organisations as they accelerate their digital transformation plans.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Gerald, would you like to introduce yourself too?
Yes, hi. So I'm Gerald Hogg, and I'm Chief for Market Impact at and Digital, where I essentially lead external comms and marketing. And part of what I do here is to enable us to make steps to achieve our mission, our purpose, which is actually to close the digital skills gap through wider impact. So of course, we help our clients address their digital skills gaps, every day through the work that we do with them, building software and technology solutions with them and digital experiences. But alongside that, we also focused on capability outcomes and upskilling. So essentially to enable our clients to deliver more of their digital transformation ambitions for themselves.
Fantastic. Thank you. And finally, David, would you like to tell everyone watching a little about who you are too?
Thanks, Neil. David Venter, I work for GSK. Currently responsible for the separation program. We've demerged a consumer healthcare division to a standalone FTSE 100 company. Equally, I'm also the advocate for one of our strategic partners. We have a complementary resourcing capability across our digital and tech organization. And part of that responsibility is staying abreast of the developments, both internally and externally.
Well, I'm really looking forward to diving a little bit deeper into this topic with you today, because there is so much talk about the global digital skills shortage, but there also needs to be more clarity about exactly what that means. So, Gerald, just to set the scene for today's conversation, can you share your definition of digital skills and why we shouldn't automatically confuse them with tech skills, for example?
Sure. So this year we conducted some research quite widely across the country. In fact, we surveyed 5,000 knowledge workers and hiring managers to understand perceptions and attitudes surrounding digital skills. We found that the majority of people still associate digital skills with tech skills, and with that basic IT skills or more advanced skills around programming and coding. And we feel that definition is too narrow. However, we see how it's come about, right? After all, the most commonly used definition of digital skills internationally is actually the ability to use digital devices. And that drives mindsets in education and government and more widely. And in fact, we see this as illustrative of what is a general and systematic misunderstanding of what skills actually matter when creating digital solutions. So basic IT skills, are important. We absolutely need them, and coding and engineering skills are also important. Somebody needs to do the coding and the engineering, but there's just so much more than that, right? So, what you need to be able to know what to code, right, and why. So if you think about what creates a great digital experience, it's understanding users, understanding markets, how users use products. Understanding their needs, understanding which needs aren't being met, and thinking creatively about how to create better experiences, and understanding what features will matter most, and focusing on those and then iterating them. So all those are critical skills, and they don't necessarily have anything specifically to do with coding or engineering, right? Again, forming cross-functional and diverse teams to work together on delivering and iterating such product, and the skills that make teams perform well, these are also important skills. And then the skills at the organizational level, right? So, how to enable and empower high performing multidisciplinary teams, to pursue those outcomes. That's also a form of skill that's really important. So really, we see digital skills as being far broader than the pure tech skills that individuals may possess, right? There's the individual skills that individuals have, whether those are tech skills, but also human skills such as empathy, communicating with empathy, problem solving, conflict resolution, developing oneself, developing others. Those are also important skills at an individual level. Then you've got the team sort of skills around enabling psychological safety, encouraging diversity of thought, cohesion, purpose, and at an organization level, things like being truly purpose-driven, people first, magnets for talent, as examples. Again, those sorts of organizational skills are relevant in the digital context.
And Rich, I'd love to bring you in on this. We're talking about the broader need for skills and a more up-to-date definition. Is this misunderstanding and confusion something that you see as well?
I think I would support the commonly held assumption that digital equals technology. And I think that is not the case these days. Thinking about this in anticipation of this conversation, I came up with the kind of the three-cornered hat. We have people who consume. Yeah, so we call those users, but of course everybody is a user. We have people who create, okay, and creation is the new activity, as well as those who develop, okay. And I think if we think about digital skills being about those who consume, those who create, and those who develop, that's a broader based platform on which to have these conversations. One of the things that I was just refreshing my memory of, 11 years ago, almost 11 and a bit years ago, Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google, told the UK government that this was coming. And we all went, oh, how very dare you? But of course, he's right. Yeah, he absolutely called out the fact that our universities were not delivering the kind of competent graduates that would serve us well going forward. So this is not a novel phenomenon. This has been coming for a while. And perhaps governments in plural may be accused of not having kind of responded to that. But one of the points I'll pick up later is that in the modern tech world, of course, if you take any of the major ecosystems, Apple, Microsoft, Google, then in those tech stacks now, there are tools that allow erstwhile non-technical people to do technical type activities. The creation piece, for example, the kind of low-code, no-code tool set, which allows people who have deep business knowledge and competence to do some of the things that previously you'd have required an engineer to do. And I think that's a massive enabler. Those are maturing. They're not perfect now. If you look at the Microsoft Power Apps, for example, they're okay. You can't develop enterprise class applications with them though yet, but that will come. So there's something about tech, making tech easier for non-technical people to use, which I think is a key enabler.
A great point. And David, I'm curious, what are you seeing out there? Is there any insights you can expand on that you've seen?
I confer with Rich and Gerald. I think in terms of observation, digital skills for us are a bit of a tough nut to crack because it's not the classic tech skills. We are definitely seeing an expansion of those capabilities. Gerald, you talked about empathy. We talk about the CX requirement of usability, design thinking. These are not faculties that people are necessarily equipped with. And the educational institutions around the world are equally not evolving fast enough for us. I think also the nature of the working population has changed, and that is forcing us to think about retention, a really attractive place to bring talent in, not just tech talent, a full complementary set of skills. So definitely I see the same threads coming up in our recruitment drives, within our retention requirements, but also the way that we're evolving the business, because we were traditionally a tech house. We're now a digital and tech organization. So the brief has expanded tremendously. I add data to that. I add business insights to that, business acumen skills to that, where we're not just getting classic computer science graduates coming out. We're looking for a much broader range of capabilities. And that is throwing up these hurdles about how you attract them, how you retain them, but also how you incubate them within the organization. So massive internal reskilling approach underway as well.
And Gerald, can you expand on the scale of the digital skills gap that you're seeing? Because we will have people watching in multiple industries, and it feels like that this is impacting everyone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It is, Neil. So yeah, as part of our research, we've analysed vacancy data from across the UK, and in fact, every known vacancy for the last 5 years, and we've been able to mine that for skills. And what we found is that if you look at the latest year, so for 2022, and that was year to date, about July time when we did the research, 24% of all vacancies were demonstrating demand for digital skills. And what we understand to be the baseline of the proportion of the workforce in the UK, which is pretty much stable at 33 million people, the proportion of that workforce that has digital skills or these relevant skills is somewhere between 7 and 14%, depending on which source you look at. So that equates to a gap of 3 to 6 million people who do not have the skills that are in demand. So that's a sizable gap, and we have to think about that in terms of how it will that demand cycles through. So in 3 to 4 years' time, it means that we have to have resolved that gap. So recruiting alone is not going to solve the problem, right? Because otherwise, we'll be chasing a smaller and smaller pool to address that need. Offshoring and outsourcing are possibilities, but the wage arbitrage associated with that is eroding, and the reality is you don't end up building the capability internally. So that's a strategic choice for C-suites and leaders to make. And of course, from a graduate's standpoint, there's less than 1 million graduates coming through every year, and not all of them will necessarily have all of the desire to work in the domains that we're trying to attract people into. So really, our sense is that upskilling is and cross-skilling are really important if we're to make any kind of material progress at the rate that we need to make it to address that gap.
And David, I can see you shaking your head in agreement there. No big surprises, huh?
No big surprises. I think the reality is organizations may have cut those training and education budgets. I think there's an epiphany moment at the moment where we are making that investment. We are driving a very, very strong agenda of curiosity, that people are self-learning. You can provide courses, training materials, etc. But if there's no appetite to do that cross-skilling and upskilling, it doesn't reap the rewards. And to Gerald's point, we're not going to close the gap. I just want to build one other point there. We've looked at our outsourcing partners. We've got 20% churn in the Indian subcontinent. That gives you 5 years. Then you've rotated 100% of your workforce in simple measure terms. These are things that you've got to play the medium to long game on. There's no one panacea to it.
And Rich, anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this from a risk point of view, right? So there's a risk to the economy, there's risk to organisations, and arguably there's risks to individuals. And classically, when you think about risk management, you think about tolerate, transfer, terminate, or treat as the 4 things you do. Now, we can't terminate this risk, and we can't really tolerate it. So we've got to treat it or transfer it. And actually, the outsourcing piece is a transference thing, but actually it's not a real transference because accountability for the outcomes remain with the contracting organisation. So it's a short-term thing, right? So we must treat it. We've got to treat it. And picking up on the point about learning versus teaching, I'm a big fan of encouraging people and equipping people to learn rather than expect to be taught. So one of the roles that I was in, I was the CIO at North Yorkshire Police here in the county where I lived for a while. And the culture when I arrived was, where's my course boss? Where's my course boss? And that was a classic culture. And our training budgets were slashed because, money for the front line was where the money was. And I worked very hard on it. Look, it's a shared responsibility, between us, the employer, and you as the employee. Here are a bunch of resources, and it could be time, it could be created content, it could be things like LinkedIn Learning, subscriptions, that kind of stuff. Not go off and do as you please, but self-curate, self-drive. And that was somewhat effective. The other thing that I want to introduce in here is kind of how do you know what skills you need? Okay, so there's role profiles. And one of the things that we all do is write the role profiles according to our local frame of reference. And we use language that is familiar to us and may not be relevant to other organizations. So I discovered and still utilize the skills framework for the information age, which is an independent framework. And I really like it. It's not perfect, it's not complete, but it's contemporary and it's updated. And if you look at the version 8 of that, there are some really modern competencies in there, such as data science, analytics, and product management. And we've talked about some of those things too. Now, just speaking about product management, I think product management is a fantastic philosophy. I worked with the central government department a few months ago about moving from kind of waterfall and project into agile and product management. And the greatest part of the value of that was that multidisciplinary team that was talked about earlier. Yeah, but what it does do, of course, is create new demands. Who is the product manager here? And what skills do they have? Do they sit in IT anymore? No, they don't. So the whole kind of where IT used to be a vertical thing made up of engineers, it's now a diffuse cross-organization discipline. And we've got to really not just recognize that, but embrace that as a part of the solution. So digital isn't just technology, it's business working hand in hand. So there's a couple of points in there that I think are worth thinking about.
They really are. And the big question for you, Gerald, is how did we get here? Can you tell me a little bit more about the alignment gap? Because I know that's a topic very close to your heart, isn't it?
Yes, I think how we got here is probably threefold. Although there's probably many more reasons as well, but I can think of three reasons for how we got here. So the first is that lack of common understanding of what digital skills are, right, and what is what is important, and that gap persists. That true understanding of digital skills it is really the preserve of a few, right? It's the digital native organizations. It's those tech businesses that have really got their head around it. And then I think the term digital itself is also unhelpful because I think it shrouds what we do in mystery, and I think it perpetuates an us and them sort of divide, right? Those who understand it and those who feel excluded, because it can be a divisive factor as well amongst knowledge workers, right? Whether if you don't understand as well, or if you feel that you don't understand, then you feel somehow excluded. Decision makers in many organizations are often behind the curve, right, in understanding the skills that they need, that they have, or the ones that they don't have enough of at the level that they need. For example, the decision makers may not actually agree on whether they need to be building capability internally versus outsourcing and offshoring, right? And obviously, one route takes patient investment, and the other's a more expedient option. So, you've got to get alignment around those sorts of basic strategic decisions around how you deal with your capability needs. And so without that understanding and that clarity of what the gap is, it's hard to get alignment around the C-suite table and to commit to the kind of investment that's necessary to drive to increase the capability in those critical skill areas. So for me, that's the alignment gap. It's addressing that, and without that alignment on what matters, I think organizations will struggle to mobilize and move forward at the necessary pace.
And there's two words that keep coming up there, alignment and misalignment. Rich was on about a few moments ago where people used to come into the office and, where's my course, boss? And then you've just mentioned the alignment gap. So, Dave, I'm curious, are you seeing a misalignment in the needs of workers and the upskilling options that are being provided? Are you seeing anything like that?
I think historically, if we look at where COVID was, there was a hiatus, right? It was a 2-year period of almost stasis, but it threw up opportunities. I think the ability to go virtual proved a lot of the pivot points that people had anchored on were no longer relevant. And I think that's changing the nature of business. So I think that alignment has now been strengthened to the purpose and the actual potential that digital brings to an organization. The other thing is that it's also a competitive advantage capability if you get it right, but it does require that investment. And this is where the misalignment comes, because then now you're fighting for all of the same investment dollars. And where do you place the bets to get the best return? And because some of this doesn't have a hard return on investment, you've still got the skeptics in the organization, and that creates contention and misalignment. in the digital and tech organization that I sit in today, I think we've got fantastic alignment, but it's taken 12 plus months to get there. And that's strategies laid out. We're now in the process of early days of execution. One could say skeptically, time will tell, but we're seeing that contention within the organization still somewhat buoyant in the organization. And that's what we've got to break through. If we don't bring the right skills to bear, we will unfortunately reap the downside of it. I think if we get the right skills, then we're off to a winner. But we're in a very, very small pool for people.
100% with you on that. And of course, the scale of the problem means that it is not as simple as just looking to recruiting or even offshoring. So the final question I want to ask each of you, and Rich, I'll throw this at you first. How are you tackling these problems and everything that we've talked about today?
So my clients, because I work as an independent consultant at the moment, recognise that radical change is required. Okay, so the things they've done historically worked for a while, don't work now. And, things like setting up apprenticeships, setting up academies, taking people in at entry level and growing them is, even though there's a nervousness about them leaving once they've got the accreditations and the badges and the skills, which of course brings into question the retention point earlier. Now, in the public sector, they're particularly challenged, shall we say, because they're simply they're unable to compete for the package of benefits, the salary and everything else that the private sector does. So if there is a global problem, the public sector in the UK is particularly challenged by that, because it can't just buy in the best talent by offering, upper decile salaries. But I was looking this morning at the DWP, the Department of Work and Pensions Digital Academy, and they started this 3 or 4 years ago, recognising that they were a massive outsource organization. I mean, when I was there a long time ago, their IT spend was £1 billion a year. Okay, £1 billion a year. And they managed to shave off a third of that through some of the work that I was involved with. But it was still massive. But more than that, they were dependent on the big outsourcing firms, which held them to ransom in some respects commercially, because they're obviously for profit. So 4 or 5 years ago, the DWP started to invest in an academy. And if you look at their website, they've got a pretty sophisticated kind of career pathways and entry levels and competencies and that kind of stuff. So I think doing something radically different, not just hiring in the finished product, but investing in the academy, leveraging the government apprenticeship schemes, which of course are imperfect, but they are there to be used, would be some of the things I think my clients are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, anything you'd like to share on how you're tackling these problems that we've highlighted today?
Interestingly, Rich raised an academy. We have them now internally in the organization, so a similar type approach. There's an element of recruitment for specific niche skills. We're also looking, particularly where we partner externally, not just tech providers and outsource providers, but actually companies on the business side that we're partnering with, their digital native credentials. Super important, because if the two organizations are misaligned, it doesn't necessarily manifest in a positive outcome. So definitely outsource complementary worker capability. So it is a multi-tiered strategy, but definitely, as I said right at the beginning, the investment within that curiosity and that internal learning is one of the big pieces. Job swaps. So we're using every tool in the toolbook available to create that, coupled with a very, very strong focus on a modern employer experience. So from the time that you start recruitment to the time that people get onboarded, what does that journey look like? What does it feel like? Because we're just not going to be able to attract and necessarily retain in a very, very competitive marketplace. And that covers the whole spectrum of skills, not just digital and tech, in fact.
And Gerald, to bring us home, we've talked about a lot today in a short amount of time, from the misalignment in the needs of workers and upskilling options that are being provided. And it's not as simple as looking at recruiting or offshoring. So is there anything you can leave us with today on how you're tackling these problems and maybe end on a positive note?
Well, I think there's a lot to play for, I think, is the takeaway. I think we need to work collectively to widen the understanding of what digital skills means to support organizations, our peers, and to gain the knowledge that they need to drive that alignment amongst the decision makers and the leadership in their organizations. And I think that's the big challenge for all of us to face into. And of course, yeah, I mean, we on a day-to-day basis, on a small scale, we work with our clients to do that, right? So we, whenever we start an engagement, we explicitly sign up to value agreements. Those value agreements seek capability improvements wherever there are opportunities to do so, right? And those are from the leadership down. There are always opportunities to bring knowledge and understanding of what capabilities are required, and to help the organizations that we work with to build those capabilities. And if I just quote an example, there's a large UK bank that we work with, where we've established a partnership, and we've set up joint development centers. And the teams in those centers are partly drawn from our people, right, and partly from the bank's people. And the development centers have adopted our ways of working around product delivery and engineering. We help the bank recruit and attract, and our own academy supports in terms of formal training, and our agile coaches work within the development centers. And we also arrange for secondments for the bank's people to work in what we call our clubs, which are our own client-facing development units, to broaden their experiences. So there's a symbiotic relationship and partnership, which is a long-term partnership that we put in place. And what that's enabled the bank to do is to expand their engineering and delivery capability significantly, increase their cadence, improve, noticeably and measurably improve employee engagement and retention. So there are ways and means to do this. It just takes the commitment and the alignment to invest behind.
I think the tech and digital skills shortage is a challenge that's impacting every industry right now. And I would invite everyone watching to join the conversation and maybe message us via the CIO WaterCooler website and check out other discussions too. But more than anything, just a huge thank you to Rich, Gerald and David for coming on here, sharing your insights with everyone watching today and bringing the topic to life. Thank you.